Good morning, Crushers. Lily here. I am out on my walk. I got about 3,000 steps already this morning. It's a lovely day. And I wanted to talk to you today about people pleasing and emotional eating. Do you ever find yourself putting others' needs ahead of your own on a regular basis? Have you been taught that conflict is something to be avoided at all costs? Have you ever said no when you really meant yes, or said yes when you really meant no, just to make someone else happy or to smooth things out? I ask you these questions because these are hallmarks of people pleasing, and they're not limited to women, but as women, we are often cultured and socialized to repress our true selves, to make sure that as mothers or wives or family members or caretakers, that everyone else is comfortable, even at the expense of our own needs, not just preferences, but our own needs. And what happens is you can end up feeling very underappreciated over time, because you kind of in your heart of hearts think, well, I'm pretty generous to most of you guys, so maybe you'll learn from me and my example and you'll show me some affection or appreciation in return one day. And so you put off your satisfaction, and it remains something that is external, that someone else is supposed to give to you as a thankful gesture in response to your generous nature. And what happens is that you can be sadly disappointed when those gestures and appreciation don't come. And what happens is there starts to often become a very seething but very low-grade and chronic dystopia that happens inside of you. It's something of an existential crisis, and you think, I'm so nice and kind, and why am I not getting this in return? So you're spending your time trying to make things pleasant for everybody else, but not feeling very appreciated or respected or even reciprocated in those efforts. So this low-grade, chronic, dystopian, existential experience becomes your life story. And you start to wonder, how did this happen to me? Why was I so socialized and cultured to avoid being my real self, to avoid saying what I really mean? Why are my feelings so unacceptable or so undesirable to those around me? And when you have that face-to-face with yourself in the mirror, sometimes you can come up with the understanding that you are, in a sense, living a lie. You are shuttering yourself off, your real self off, in preference to some ideal that you've been cultured or socialized to present to the world. Whether that's making sure you always have your makeup on, making sure that you behave in a way that doesn't displease anyone, always letting someone else's choices or preferences, even as something as simple as choosing where to go to dinner, what to have to eat, become examples of how we, as women, stuff our preferences and emotions down into a hole. Sorry, my headset's caught in my hair. And that can become a chronic nightmare after a while, because you don't think of yourself as being a liar when you're doing this. You think of yourself as being generous. But what's really happening, if you look at it, is that you are lying to other people about who you are and what you like and what you want. And more importantly than that, let's say you decide that you want to say something about it, and you've gotten fed up at certain times. If we don't have the skills to express what we really want and who we really are in a way that is receivable by the other person, then we suffer in silence, or we shut down, or we turn into a silent treatment, start giving that out because someone is unable to understand what we really mean, and then respond in a way that's meaningful to us. So then a lot of resentment builds up. So you have this, in addition to this chronic like dystopia and this disconnection between who you present to the world and what you really feel like inside, you also have this growing sense of anger and frustration and unappreciation. And that becomes something that you want to soothe, something that you want to heal, something that you want to repress, something that you want to alleviate. And food becomes a very common, very socially acceptable method for doing so. Whereas it would be, less socially acceptable, for example, to show up drunk in public. There's no problem with you going to a buffet and overeating, and nobody's really paying that much attention because eating is legal and you don't get arrested for driving under the influence of food. It doesn't really impair your ability to think logically. But over time, this chronic emotional condition of emotional suffering and lack of expression through the preference to people please over self-care can become a really chronic habit that we as emotional eaters simply don't have an option for, to replace it with something else. And we don't have the language to communicate to our family members and mates and spouses and bosses and partners and friends when they're taking advantage of us or when we feel that they are not reciprocating. Here's an example. An old friend of mine and I reconnected after like 20 years apart. And it was easy to pick up the, friendly banter that we'd always had. But one time I realized that she would call and I would listen to her rant and rave or something about her job. That would go on for about 45 minutes. And then it would be a break because she'd finished her rant. And in her mind, that meant it was time to get off the phone because she was done with her side of the conversation. But in my mind, it was time for my side to show up. And so I would start talking and she'd ask, how's things with you? And I would assume that she really was interested in knowing. And so we would talk, and I would hope that I would get some support from her in the same way that I had offered it to her. Not just to be a bitch session or have a repository for any angst that I was feeling, but to have some kind of maybe constructive help on how to deal with some things that were troubling to me. An outside opinion, a sounding board, a different point of view, for example. Something constructive. But after about two minutes, maybe she'd interrupt me and give some cursory advice. And then I'd say, well, I'm not really sure that's really what happened. I was thinking of it more like this. And she'd give me 2 more minutes of her advice. And then she'd be like, I really don't want to hear this negativity. I need to go. And I was like, you've just unloaded your soul onto me for 45 minutes. You don't have 5 minutes in return for me. And instead of being able to say that to her, she was gone off the phone, but I started to just not want to talk to her anymore. And I didn't want to take her calls, and I didn't really want to interact with her and keep giving her all of my support and energy in this very one-sided relationship. Now, was I acting as a people pleaser? Possibly. Or maybe I was just acting as a good friend. But the difference is a people pleaser would continue that relationship and probably would never say anything about it to the other person. So I'm different. I want to be more proactive about the relationships in my life and about setting boundaries around them and what I will and will not accept from people. And then once I explain myself to them, if they still choose to behave in a way that is against my boundary or crosses my boundary, then I will probably terminate the relationship in a loving and detached with love kind of way. But people pleasing is something that we're not socialized to do. And especially with family members, you can't exactly just discontinue the relationship because your blood, you have a unit, you have a very complex relationship with family members, both family of origin and family of your own that you create through partnerships and marriages and children and so on. But all of that can't be necessarily unraveled in one day. But what's important to recognize is that emotional eating can stem from a sense of people-pleasing behavior. And it's kind of a catchword, but when you really look at how well you're able to be yourself and show up authentically in your relationships, that has a lot to do with understanding if maybe you're sidelining your own needs, your own personality, even your own desires about what kind of food you want. You get an equal vote when the family's deciding where to go to eat or on a date. You get an equal vote, and you might not always get what you want. Sometimes you'll go where your partner wants. Sometimes your partner will go where you want, in a kind of a reciprocal relationship. But in a people-pleasing relationship, sometimes you'll pick a place that you don't even really want to go to, but you think you have a better chance of getting them to agree to it than the one that you actually want. That's trying to ameliorate your fear of conflict or your agreeableness in a way that is very, it betrays your authenticity. So all I'm saying here is that people pleasing is something we're socialized to do as women, but it isn't necessarily something that's good for us. And it isn't necessarily something that will lead to a fulfilling life of authenticity and a sense of cohesion between your inner and outer self. So if you feel that you use food to soothe yourself when instances of people pleasing occur, I wanted to give you that food for thought today. I'd love you to post your comments below, post your questions about this, list any experience you have with it, and especially any successes that you've been able to achieve in relation to overcoming your self-soothing behaviors as a result of people-pleasing and emotional eating. All right, that's all I have for you guys today. Signing out. I'll catch you next time.